All right, hello everyone, I'm Justin Scarpaci and welcome to Everything I Know About Asset Inventory I Learned from Taylor Swift. The Justin's version, first off, if you're familiar with Taylor Swift, she recorded, I think, 3 albums now to get basically back her original rights to her music and everything like that. So in those versions, all the songs have Taylor's version after them. I figured I'd get ahead of that problem. If anyone tries to steal this talk, I just do Justin's version now and then don't have to worry about that later. So just real quick about me. I am not local to Pittsburgh. I think from the audience perspective, at least if he from Scranton is the furthest away, I've got him beat. I live in Columbia, South Carolina, although I'm originally from about an hour away in Youngstown, Ohio. So people familiar with Youngstown, anyone? Yeah, there we go. As it says there, I'm a husband, father. You can see my better half of my family, or better 2/3 of my family there with my wife and my 3-year-old son, Chase. A little bit about me. So I started off kind of in this whole thing. Taylor and I have been at our respective crafts about the same amount of time. She's had a little bit more financial success probably than me, but I definitely have more challenge coins and con t-shirts than she, I would assume, has. But I started off in the Marine Corps. I was if anyone's familiar with the Marine Corps, I was 2651, Signals Intelligence. After that, I went to work as a contractor for the U.S. Air Force, specifically U.S. Air Force Central Command, and protected our networks in the Middle East and Southwest Asia from good old Sumter, South Carolina, is where the AFCENT NOSC is located. So since that time, in about 2015, I was part of the early team at Carbon Black. So I joined there, in kind of the early hypergrowth stages, everything like that. Folks familiar with Carbon Black in here? Okay, I was there for 7 years, and then last year I kind of joined up with a lot of my former Carbon Black folks, including our co-founder and CEO, JJ Guy, at a company called Sevco Security. Anyone familiar with Sevco Security? I'm sure it'll be less hands. Hey, we got a few. So Sevco Security, what we are, is an asset intelligence platform. So we look at asset inventory problem every day. Good thing about it is we have, as a cloud platform, we have a lot of data around what we can observe in our customers. I'll be sprinkling some of that in today, along with Taylor Swift lyrics. So it's not going to be all data. There will be some fun. But yeah, that's what I currently do. Is I work as a technical strategist at Sevco Security. The We Hack Healther, this is if anyone's not familiar with it, this is kind of a community started by Ben Canning and Dave Kennedy. It's around health and fitness. It's targeted specifically at InfoSec professionals. So there's all different sides of it. There's a Discord server. There's just #WeHackHealth on Twitter. But what we do is we motivate each other to get better from a health and fitness perspective and everything like that. So if that's something that interests you, if you're interested in starting your fitness journey or health journey, check it out. Who am I not? So first off, I'm definitely not the biggest Swiftie out there. I'm probably not the biggest Swiftie in this room, and I'm maybe not even a Swiftie at all. What I am is someone who has enjoyed Taylor's music since the very early days. I admire her as an artist, respect her. Her success is inarguable. She's just an amazing talent. I am not a singer or a dancer. I actually wrote in the abstract that there would be no singing, so you don't have to worry about that. If any of you want to sing, you're welcome to, like sing along or come up. It's up to you on that. I'm also not Swift on security. So this one here is, this is probably one of the oldest and largest InfoSec accounts out there. And I think it used to actually be InfoSec Taylor Swift is what they called themselves. I don't know who this person is, but they're really good. And I also kind of respect them as a practitioner and an artist. It's a very entertaining account and a lot of really good information on there. So how did I get here? To get into Pittsburgh is I-77 to I-79, so that's not even a slide. But how did I get here to this topic? And it's definitely a little bit of an unusual topic. Well, the air store, it's everywhere, right? So you can see a few things on this slide here. You can see, for one, it's larger than 50 countries' GDP. So the Federal Reserve did some economic analysis around it. The Tor has generated $5 billion in revenue in local economies across here. It was a big news story last week on that. One of my coworkers actually lived in Nashville when Taylor Swift came to town there, and he kind of posted in one of our Slack channels, hey, there's Swifties everywhere. I can't even leave my apartment, because he lived near the venue there. And a colleague of mine, Jeremiah, and I kind of went back to replying with that with just Taylor Swift song titles, like You Need to Calm Down and so on in there. So from that, I knew I was coming to BSides Pittsburgh to meet up with some of the WeHack Health community. Those two things kind of coming together, I had a dream. So my dream was I was here giving this talk just like I am right now. So I woke up, first thing I did is slacked the dream to myself so I wouldn't forget it, and submitted the talk a few days later. So one thing I'll call out is, this there is Tor, that picture there, that's actually, Heinz Field. I think it's Acrisure now, but I still call it Heinz Field. I guess the largest crowd they've ever had in that stadium was when Taylor Swift was in town. They had over 73,000 people in that stadium, and she sold out multiple nights. So again, it's everywhere, right? So that's how I got to Taylor Swift. How I got to asset inventory, that's a probably more relevant topic to this audience, but also a lot less interesting one. So it really kind of all started back in 2016, finishing up grad school at Penn State. You'll notice this slide has a little bit different color scheme than the rest of the deck. That's because I couldn't just put red on a Penn State slide. Penn State and red didn't feel right at all. So I know this audience would appreciate that. But when I worked for the Air Force, one of my jobs there was as a cyber intelligence analyst on a hunt team there. So I was very interested in cyber threat intelligence. That's kind of, at this period of time when I was in grad school, I was transitioning out of that, going to work at Carbon Black. So for my capstone project, I was focused on cyber threat intelligence, and really what I wanted to get out of it going in was just understanding why more folks weren't using it, and especially why they weren't using it more effectively. Maybe they pay for a threat intel feed or something like that, but are they really actually getting something out of that? So that was kind of where I started. The process ended up being, and this will put everyone to sleep if I go through the full form of it, but a series of qualitative interviews. So I sat down, asked open-ended questions to folks from large organizations, small organizations, folks that work at MSSPs, folks that work in different roles in organizations, CISOs, practitioners, so on. And what I did, which you can see sort of on the upper right there, is I then went through, transcribed these interviews, and coded the responses in there to pick out emerging themes and concepts from the research. So this is qualitative research that then I turned kind of into quantitative by coding it. It's called grounded theory approach. So you don't go in with basically what you're wanting out of it. You're using the responses from the folks to come up with an emerging theme or model from it. So from that, ultimately what I ended up developing was the thing on the lower right here, the cyber threat intelligence implementation model. Kind of hard to see. It's a little bit on purpose because that's a whole other talk. So we won't be going through the cyber threat intelligence implementation model today. If you're interested in that, I'll put the paper out on my GitHub. It's fine. I'm willing to share it with anybody, but it's not what we're going to go through today. What we are going to talk about a little bit is the first step of it. So in talking to these folks, kind of the first thing, and if you were to use threat intelligence in your environment that you needed was to know yourself. And I kind of broke that down into two sub-steps in that. One of that is knowing your business, right? What's important to your business, and what's great is there are ISACs and things out there that are specific to certain verticals that actually can even get threat intelligence that is specific to your industry. But it's beyond just your industry. It's knowing your business, knowing what's important to your business, how your business functions, what your architecture is like, what normal is essentially. So that's one half of it. The second part is knowing your security tools and security controls in our infrastructure. So one of the things I did as a cyber threat intel analyst is when I got different types of threat intel reports and so on, is I would model them in our environment. Now it's not, I was going in and doing a emulation exercise or something like that, but I was just kind of looking at, hey, what would we have that would maybe block this, right? What would be kind of the path that they would have to go through in our network and what might get in somebody's way if this attacker came after us, right? So those two things, like I said, that's kind of getting to know yourself whole other talk, but that's kind of what got me interested in really an inward focus in security. So I'm not the only one. I was actually really excited at RSA 2023, Kevin Mandia, he definitely didn't copy me because he's one of the titans of this industry if you're not familiar with him. But he said something that I was just like, yes. He said, the threats will change all the time. Don't ever forget the advantage that you do have. You should know more about your business, your systems, your topology, your infrastructure than any attacker does. This is an incredible advantage. Anyone disagree with that? Anyone, or how many people feel like they do know their environment better than any attacker would? Hey, great. Yeah, a couple of you guys here. So you should, right? The problem is because we've been so focused a lot of times on the external, what's, the latest threats that are out there and all that stuff, we don't take a lot of time to look at ourselves, right? So my kind of thinking on that is the threats change constantly and unpredictably. You might be able to know what's happening today or yesterday, but you can't know what's happening tomorrow. And really, when it happens tomorrow, today, a lot of that should be your vendor's problem, right? So endpoint security, like CrowdStrike, they should be the ones that are really looking at that, pushing detections into the product or prevention rules and so on. And any number, pick any vendor out there, right? So what I kind of think is, a lot of your time might be better spent looking at yourself because you now have so many companies out there that are competent looking at external threats. And I'm not saying that CrowdStrike or any vendor out there will stop every attack, right? Nobody's saying that, but I'm just saying from an investment time, you may want to look in a different direction a little bit. So it says here, you should know what your organization looks like and what change looks like in there. And this kind of, when I think about this a lot, I think about SANS used to put out a poster, and maybe they still do, called Know Normal, Find Evil. And a lot was on that was, hey, this process should have this parent process, and it should have this child process or whatever. So you could kind of get an idea how Windows is supposed to work. And from that, you could find evil. This same thing can apply to anything, pretty much. But the problem is a lot of folks jump straight to find evil and don't take the time to know normal. So it's a lot easier to find evil, and this was kind of the whole inspiration for SANS putting that out, if you know what normal is, right? So, and that's applicable in a lot of different ways. My opinion is asset inventory is a great place to start in this, right? Knowing what you have, and then it goes really kind of beyond that, as you'll see here pretty soon, is kind of the first step in being able to know normal. So asset inventory. I'm going to talk about really kind of two different things today. So one of those is the characteristics of what an asset inventory looks like. So I'm not telling you what an asset inventory product should look like or like a specific methodology for doing an asset inventory. There's a lot of different ways to do it. Most of them are valid. A lot of them are homegrown, can be. So it's really what are the characteristics of if you were to build this or if you were looking at a tool to do this for you, what should it do? What should it look like? The graphic you'll see there, that's actually from Sevco Security's website. You can see that one's a little bit more complex because, again, that's what we do every day. It's a little bit beyond what we're going to talk about today, but that's publicly available if you're interested in that. On the right, the importance of it. So I talk about compliance, insurance, overall security program in there. And this actually picture on the right is from, and it may be hard for you to see, but this is from Property Casualty 360. So it's a property and casualty insurance trade website or something like that, right? And they're the ones writing about the importance of asset inventory and cybersecurity. Seems kind of weird, but both from a compliance and an insurance perspective, asset inventory has been step one in most compliance frameworks for a long time. They've kind of known the importance of it. I don't know that it's actually really been done right in a compliance framework, but now insurers are kind of starting to look a little bit more at that of, hey, if you are wanting to get cyber insurance or renew it and stuff, this is one of the things you need to have. And they're getting into that with a lot of different controls right now, but that's kind of what we're starting to see there is compliance is shifting just from regulatory frameworks to a little bit of the insurance there too. And it's important to your overall security program. And I'll spend plenty of times talking about the number of aspects that it would be important for you, but it's gonna be a little bit different for everybody, right? So All right, so at this point, you're probably like, where is Taylor Swift? I thought this was going to be a Taylor Swift talk. You had one slide a while ago, and then you've been talking about grad school and everything else. So now we will actually get to some Taylor Swift. We'll start off. Well, she's telling us about the importance of your asset inventory being comprehensive here, right? So she says, I got a long list of X levers. They'll tell you I'm insane, but I've got a blank space, baby, and I'll write your name. So this blank space, these are all the assets you maybe don't know about. And that's because a lot of times when folks have tried to approach this problem, again, maybe they have some compliance need to do it or something like that, they are pulling an inventory, maybe from Active Directory or something like that, but you have more than just an inventory in your environment, and none of them probably know about everything unless it's a very small environment or something, right? So what I say there, existing controls are inventories of assets. So some of them are kind of even unconventional. So you don't just think about it as directory services like Active Directory, things like endpoint security, patch management, even Slack can be an inventory of assets as there is users using Slack. All sorts of things like that. If it consumes a service from, passes through, or is managed by something, that's a potential source of inventory for you. So if you go down this path of building an asset inventory, you might have to think outside the box a little bit to be fully comprehensive. The problem with these, like I said, one source is they don't know what they don't know. So sometimes we'll get something like, folks will think of an asset discovery tool, something that scans your network, but what about remote users? What about the DMZ? What about some subnet there that somebody changed the firewall rule on and all of a sudden that scanning tool can't reach it or something like that, right? Any source, and that's not picking on asset discovery. It's a very good source of inventory, but it is just that. It's an inventory. It's not an inventory of inventories, and it's not comprehensive. So kind of my view on it is the more sources you have, the more comprehensive you can be. The more, and the way we show this, a lot of times in a Venn diagram is just showing the overlap in what each source tells you. So in order to do this is kind of the bad news slide. This is the hard part. When you start working with multiple sources of inventory, they're not going to be in the same format. And you can kind of see the first example there, if you've ever done this as a spreadsheet exercise or something like that, you've probably encountered this. Just with something like MAC address, you may have something that isn't delimited at all. Might have something that's colon delimited. Might have something that is dash delimited. So those three things on the second bullet there, those are all the same MAC address, but they're displayed three different ways, right? And it can give timestamps, all sorts of different things. It's not just MAC address that's like that. A lot of things are in different formats, and converting between those is going to be kind of one of the problems. And what you have to do is kind of pick one and normalize all the sources on that. The other thing is there is some difference in values. So you'll see even between, say, like Active Directory and Azure AD, they will report the same version of Windows 10 in two different ways. So one is the actual Windows 10 0.19, 0.42, 1889 Microsoft speak is what it says in Azure AD. In Active Directory, it may just be Windows 10 Enterprise. Another source might be something else, right? So again, trying to figure out how you're going to match those things up there, that's a lot of times kind of the hard part. So, looking at this, that's kind of where I would say, like, it says wreck my plans. This is where you go in, you're thinking, hey, I'm going to do an asset inventory. This is going to be fast, easy. This is kind of what might wreck your plans and take your weekend or something like that. But don't be scared off by it. It's definitely something you can do. And once you do it once, anything you do once, you can do again. A asset inventory should be repeatable. So I've been using the term an asset inventory. And by that, I don't mean it's an exercise that you do one time. It's a thing that you have. You have an asset inventory. It's not like we did this in a spreadsheet 12 months ago, and that's probably still the same today. Environments are dynamic. They change all the time. They change. Your environment probably looks different at 7 a.m. than it does at 4 p.m. because different people are online at different times. Different users are using different things at different times. So the more frequent you can do this, the more confidence, one, in kind of the state of those assets, and two, in the comprehensivity of the of the inventory, right? So it might be that you have folks in one office that isn't online at 7 a.m. because, well, one, because they're a normal person, they don't start at 7 a.m. And two, because maybe they're located in San Francisco and that's 4 a.m. there, right? So those type of things are, again, when you're thinking about this, the more frequent, the more confidence you can have in it. You know, and again, going back to Taylor's wisdom there, you know, a lot of cases, you know, these assets are playing hide and seek with you a little bit. I kind of mentioned some of the problems in doing a scan or something like that, but just in general, this time frame there, and maybe something's popping on, popping off, some even like workloads are ephemeral, things like that. So again, you'll learn a lot if you do this repeatedly. Oh, so that was, you know, only a few characteristics, but they're very important characteristics of asset inventory. I could probably do a lot more on that, but I think those are probably the top three, I would say, if you were to build an asset inventory function or, you know, something to that effect that you should focus on. Now I'm going to move into kind of the importance of asset inventory or some of the things you can do with an asset inventory. This should be, you know, a little bit better idea of the value from that. So first one is kind of the straightforward one, right? It's me, hi, I'm the problem, it's me. You know, at tea time, everyone agrees. Like when folks think about asset inventory, it's usually, hey, I want to identify all the assets that I have, right? Basic use case, but that's really just kind of where it starts. And when I say assets, you notice I'm not saying devices, I'm saying assets a lot. It's because devices can be, you know, assets can be devices, users, software, a number of different things. Devices is probably where we spend most of the time, but there's a lot of different things like that. But you know, even in the asset identification kind of phase of things, it's not just, hey, what do I have? How many are there? You know, give me a number. It's about what are the characteristics of these things? You know, where are they located? What other tools are deployed to them? What state, like what version of the operating system? When's the last time they were patched? Those things are kind of some of the things I'm going to get to in here in a second, but it's still part of that asset identification is the presence and state of that asset, right? And this is kind of where most asset inventories stop, right? Hey, I did my spreadsheet exercise, I gave my auditor a number, and now I'm good, right? But it shouldn't. So typically the next, you know, traditional kind of use case folks think about is rogue devices. So hey, what if somebody comes in to my environment and plugs in, you know, like a pineapple or something like that, or, you know, whatever kind of rogue device you can think of in there. How do I know about that? Yes, an asset inventory can help you with that, but the bad news a little bit is you probably have a lot of rogue devices in that things that are, as it says there, in our State of the Cybersecurity Attack Surface report that we put out in March, we found, you know, across probably almost 1 million endpoints, 70% of all assets, you know, existing in a corporate network didn't have any enterprise source in them. So for that, that's things that are kind of an indicator that this is something that's managed, like an endpoint security or a patch management or a directory service. Those are things that kind of give you an indicator this is a managed device. In the inventories we saw there from pooling sources like active scanning tools or DHCP or whatever can do discovery, about 17% of those weren't that. Now, the thing about that is it doesn't mean that you have 17% actual rogue devices like that you have to go and cut out of your network tomorrow. A lot of these things are supposed to be there. Most of these aren't, you know, really rogue at all. They're the Xbox in the break room. They're the projector that runs Android 7 for some reason or something out there. It's all of these things that you don't know about. And really to get into finding those true rogue devices, it's worthwhile to spend a little bit of time to know the things that are supposed to be there, right? Because a lot of those things don't change frequently, and when they do change, you should know about them, right? So again, one of the benefits of it is that know normal, find evil. Let's see what's on the network and then see as it changes over time in there. So it's definitely valid to pursue. It's probably not the best, you know, it's probably not where I'd start, and it's definitely not a fast, easy win in most cases. But yeah, and the Taylor Swift quote, you know, kind of speaks itself there. I'm not gonna read that one, but you know, you can kind of see how it's related in there. So compliance, I'd kind of already mentioned that a little bit. Again, this is kind of one of the main things that brings people to asset inventory is, hey, I'm subject to X compliance framework. I listed enough that would fit into that space right there. I could have probably covered the whole slide in compliance frameworks that list asset inventory either directly as a requirement or tangentially as basically something that would align to a compensating control, like an endpoint security or something like that for PCI DSS. So asset inventory is important to compliance, but it shouldn't be the only reason you pursue asset inventory. So I had to there. A lot of times when I talk to folks that are new to this, what they will kind of say is, yeah, I've done an asset inventory before one time because I had to. We put it in a spreadsheet, and then the auditor went away, and it was okay. But I will tell you that you don't want to be on the list of names with your name in red and underlined when you're working with an auditor, right? So it's kind of good to be a little bit ahead of that and think ahead of them with that. Now, fortunately, we've kind of been off the hook in the past because asset inventory was a difficult thing to audit. As I mentioned, insurers are trying a little bit now to do that because they're tired of paying out things that weren't accounted for or configured properly, all that stuff. They kind of want to make sure that whoever they're insuring is actually operating at a decent level. But folks that have done this in the old way, a lot of times have been fortunate or unfortunate, depending on your perspective, to not been held to account for the inventory not being comprehensive or functional, essentially. So this jumps into compliance. I mentioned the compensating controls, right? And I mentioned PCI DSS, does it have AV installed and is AV set to auto update and so on. This is something you can pull out when you build your asset inventory from those controls. So if endpoint security is a source for you that you're building this asset inventory from, you can kind of get an idea on if things are missing endpoint protection. Now you can't do that if endpoint security is your only source because it doesn't know what it doesn't know, right? But if you see that endpoint security, this device isn't in your endpoint security inventory, but it is in your patch management, or it is in directory services, or it is in DHCP or something like that, that's where you can find these gaps. So we look at this data probably quarterly at CEVCO, put out, again, a report, the State of the Cybersecurity Attack Surface report, which I'll link to at the end, but if you're curious where these numbers came from. But in that report, we see about 19% of all IT assets are missing endpoint protection. We see 27% are missing or uncovered by patch management solutions. Had one scenario where we worked with a customer that had bought a new patch management solution, deployed it out everywhere, and kind of turned off what they were doing before, SCCM or something like that. They moved away from it. And in looking at their environment, we kind of hey, these devices over here aren't in your patch manager. It turned out when they rolled out the new tool, they missed their entire DMZ. So that was very much we're going to get off the call right now and go fix this thing because we don't know the last time the DMZ was patched. But it's easy to mix things in different enclaves in your environment, and that's essentially what happened there. And again, like I said, that goes back to individual tools don't know what they don't know. They can learn from each other, and that's really what an asset inventory is about in there. The other thing I'll say is, if you are taking on a new project, let's say you're buying, a new backup management solution or a patch management solution or a new endpoint security product and stuff. People love to buy tools. They do it all the time. What I say to that is backup what? Protect what? If you don't know what you have, one, how do you know how many licenses to buy? You're probably just going to buy too many, so you make sure you have enough. Two, vendors like that, by the way, but you probably, your budget doesn't like that. Two, how do you know when you're done rolling out your backup management solution? How do you know the denominator in that percentage of, hey, I'm at 100%? How do you know what that actual denominator is? How do you know it's, you're saying you're at 50 of 50 devices. What if you have 100? So now you're at 50% done, not 100% done. So again, kind of gets in the importance of it, and Taylor nails it, right? When you're doing this from an approach of understanding different controls and getting that, the controls kind of understand, whether you belong with them or not. So very good advice there. Stale assets. So this one, we actually use a few different terms for this, but I'll just use stale asset in here to kind of keep it simple and stuff. The quote on this is actually kind of perfect because the time frame we use for determining something as a stale device is it appears in an inventory, but not in any others, and the device hasn't reported in for more than 30 days. So we hadn't seen each other in a month. When you said you needed space, what? Like, why hasn't this device checked in 30 days? Kind of an important thing to know, because one, maybe it was thrown in a lake or something like that. Two, maybe it was decommed. Was it all the way decommed? Did you actually roll it out of all of all the different things that it had licenses applied to it or something like that? You might still be paying for licenses for this device that no longer exists, right? So reclaiming that stuff in there, deregistering that, it's one thing that comes apparent when you do this. The other thing is, what if it's just a broken agent or something like that? And Catherine in the last talk in here on the same track kind of talked about, sometimes attackers will go in and just disable the agent that somebody's using for endpoint security, or sometimes even just sinkhole the comms like back to the, so they can't phone home, all that stuff. That does happen. You probably, in that case, we'd kind of consider that an orphan device. You probably want to know about that earlier than 30 days, but still, it's 30 days is better than what most folks would know in that scenario right now. And I saw it in her talk as she asked to raise hands if you monitor for if your EDR tool is checking in regularly, and most folks weren't. And I throw up some numbers in there. What we see for it is, essentially, when we say is licensed, it's basically, it's present in these inventories, but it's not actually checking in and using the product. So, another one here, historical data. So I mentioned earlier that it should be repeatable, right? Asset inventory is a function, it's not a spreadsheet. It's something that you should do regularly. The kind of importance in that is that historical data, and it's for a few reasons. One, it can help you, during an incident investigation. And it's not just security incident, it's any incident, right? An outage, something like that. It's understanding, hey, when did this version of Sentinel-1 get rolled out in my environment? What was the first device had it? When did it go live everywhere? When did it get into that? When did this device that is having the problem first show up in my environment, right? Like, these are kind of the questions a lot of times you end up asking yourself in an incident investigation. You don't necessarily know it offhand, but if you're doing this function regularly, you can know that stuff, right? You can know the change over time in your environment, and you can use that change over time to identify different trends in there to find broken processes. So if you start seeing, users that are still present in some of your user inventories that don't work there anymore, and you kind of maybe know that because their workstation went bye-bye, or they haven't logged into something else, but they're still an active user in Slack and you're still paying for license for that or something like that, that's a broken offboarding process. That's something you can go and fix. And that's not the only process, but there's a lot of different ways you can do that. So hopefully, if you do this, you can have that historical data, and when you go back and look at this, you can see your assets standing in a nice dress, staring at the sunset with red lips and rosy cheeks. So hopefully that's the state you get to. Not everyone may get there, but I don't want you just to look back at this data because something bad happened, but maybe you can look back at it fondly and say, yes, my processes are working. Another one here, and this is a pretty contentious one, so this is where I say, from picture to burn, your friends, go tell your friends that I'm obsessive and crazy. When I have this discussion sometimes with customers or partners, they'll say, and vulnerability management is usually what kind of sparks this is, hey, there's too few devices here. This isn't enough. Like, you're not pulling everything in. And there's a few different reasons for that, right? So a vulnerability management product or any network-based tool and stuff, if not properly configured, often count devices that aren't there. The classic one we see a lot of times is folks configure scopes in their vulnerability management product and think we're good, right? That's all the subnets we have. But sometimes there are things that get in the way of a vulnerability management tool being able to reach those networks. And we all have these great firewalls now a lot of times that will gratuitously answer to requests in there. So from the vulnerability management product's perspective, it says, yeah, something answered here, so that's a device. It's there. I've seen it in our data sometimes where we pull this from those products, and you have a response that's basically just an IP address, on /24 network of 0 through 255, which you're like, that's pretty, that probably, usually you don't have all of that taken up, and you especially don't have 0 and 255 responding as part of a scan. The other one is kind of, sometimes they count them twice, and this happens really in two main ways. One is many things, especially servers, have multiple NICs. Those NICs are on different networks. When you scan, you set up these scopes, and there's a NIC on this network, there's a NIC on a different network. In a vulnerability management product, a lot of times that's 2 devices. So depending on, like I said, one, that may cause you to overestimate what you have if you're using that as your authoritative source of inventory. The other one is if you're paying a service provider to do vulnerability management for you and they charge you per device, they might be double charging you or triple charging you, depending on the number of NICs, for the devices that you have in your environment. So just something to keep in mind is that's one way that'll happen. The other one is scan types. So most modern vulnerability management products have an agent that they can deploy out there. They can do over the network scans as well, authenticated or unauthenticated. And a lot of times it's configured to do both, right? So you'll get pulled back a scan from the agent that's on these machines and an over-the-network scan in there. Again, that's not 2 devices. So in a lot of cases, one of the things you're doing when you're looking at this inventory, especially if you're pulling in a network-based tool, is maybe deduplicating those things in your inventory there because they may pop up with that. So again, that one makes you understand that you have actual coverage, that your scans are working. So that kind of first use case there is, nobody wants to scan a firewall, like maybe specifically for a firewall, but you don't want to just get a gratuitous answer from a firewall. That's not actual vulnerability management coverage. And also accuracy and cost, right? Like budget is tougher now than for most folks than it's been in a few years and stuff. It's definitely a question worth asking is, hey, are we getting what we paid for with this? So what now? This is kind of one of those things here of, I say kind of approach this with caution, right? So if you go down this path, and I hope at least some of you do, it's definitely worthwhile to pursue, but I say approach it with caution. And this is actually for security, this is generally good advice, especially when you're working, and I think most folks here are on the security side, but it applies both directions, when you're working with the IT ops side of the house. I've worked places where it's almost an adversarial relationship between those two. And what you don't want to do is go get all this data and stuff, come into a meeting, and they're like, but you're taking shots at me like it's Patron, and I'm just like, damn, it's 7 a.m. You don't want to blindside them on this. What you want to do is you want to work with them. You want to develop a program, explain to them, look, this isn't a blame game. I'm not trying to call anybody out here. What I am trying to do is I'm trying to pursue this asset inventory. And the good thing is they have a lot of really good resources and a lot of really smart people to help you with it. I'm going to use this to get different findings of things, hopefully fix those findings, and then audit our process to continue to make sure that those processes work. And from that, it kind of ties back to the inward focus I started out with, right? This is a component of that. It's a very important one, but you should be thinking a lot about how can I build in my home field advantage, right? What would make it hard for an attacker in my environment? And asset inventory maybe isn't to the point of making it hard for them, but it definitely can do things to not make it as easy for them, because there's nothing easier than something that is on your network that doesn't have any sort of protection on it, hasn't been patched in forever, and it's kind of just sitting there ripe for the picking for somebody on the offensive side. So key points, I kind of hit on all these, but again, know yourself, inward focus. Asset inventory is essential to that inward focus, and maybe it's not where it stops, it's kind of where it starts. Normalizing and correlating data is the hard part of doing an asset inventory, but once you do it, you can kind of do it again, and you should. It should be continuous. There are many ways it can help. That's kind of what that whole section was about, is what can it do for you? All those things there. And again, approach the problem with humility. Probably you actually might be wrong on some of this data at first. You may say, hey, this is a broken process, and it turns out it's not. But again, go in with not, and again, good advice for anything. Don't go in trying to blame somebody, throw them under the bus. We're all on the same team. Security is a team sport. You should approach it with humility and do that. So thank you everyone for coming. Thank you for everyone online. As it says there, it was enchanting to meet you. All I know is I was enchanted to meet you. I'd be glad to meet anybody who wants to come up and talk about this afterwards, or stop me in the hallway, or chase me down the escalator, or anything like that. But if you want to chase me down virtually instead, these are all the different ways you can reach me. And I do also list wehack.health. That's the domain on there for that if you're interested in, approaching a community that's similar to BSides as a community approach to security, is a community of health and wellness. So thank you, everyone.